Coming up on this week's episode of Search With Candour, I am talking to Shaunda Nicole all about how to get your elevator pitch right and how to make it consistent. Stay tuned for that on this week's episode of Search With Candour. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Search With Candour. I am your host, Jack Chambers Ward, and I've got a very exciting guest this week. I'm going to be talking to Shaunda Nicole all about how to get your elevator pitch right and how to make it consistent as well. It's a really interesting topic, and we get into a lot of different stuff because Shaunda is a self-proclaimed SEO nerd, which was definitely something that caught my eye when she contacted me about being on the show. And we actually get into a little bit of behind the scenes of how Shaunda became a guest on the show, which is not something I talk about that often on this show, which is very interesting to get a little glimpse behind the scenes of how podcasts work and stuff like that. Shaunda is an author, a podcaster, a blogger, an amazing entrepreneur, a travel ambassador across various different niches. Really, really interesting guest to have on the show, and it felt like something a little bit different outside of the directly kind of SEO guests that we have a lot on the show, which is kind of our typical week-to-week kind of stuff. Love those guys, but I thought I'd step out and try something a little bit different and have a chat with somebody who has been doing SEO and building their own brand, and we're going to kind of talk about how to build your brand, pitch yourself to working with sponsors, working with collaborators, how to get guest posting and all that kind of stuff to build your brand. And it's a really interesting conversation with Shaunda. I think you'll really, really enjoy it. And please do stay tuned for that after a word from our sponsors. Our sponsor for this week is Wix Studio, the web platform that gives agencies and enterprises the end-to-end efficiency to design, develop, and deliver exactly the way they want. Whether you manage 10 sites or 1,000 sites like some agencies do, here are a few things you can do from start to finish in less than 2 minutes on Studio. You can set up native marketing integrations with Google, Bing, and more in just one click. You can save so much time by reusing custom templates, widgets, sections, and design libraries across all of your sites, instead of having to build them from scratch each and every time. You can easily create seamless handovers by adding tutorials, guides, and more to your client dashboards. And speaking of dashboards, you get a full 360 view of all of your projects from one workspace with total control. And whether you're working your site with fellow SEOs, developers, other marketers, you're able to work on the same canvas at the same time with all of your team members. And of course, you'll be able to leverage some of the best in-class SEO defaults such as server-side rendering and automated structured data markup across all of your Wix sites. That is time up, I'm afraid, but the list keeps on going. Step into the Wix Studio by clicking the link in the show notes or the video description down below and see for yourself. Thank you so much to Wix Studio for sponsoring us here at Search With Candour. Our next sponsor is Core Updates. That is the latest newsletter from the one and only Mark Williams-Cook. You may know Mark from his unsolicited SEO tips and his appearances on this very show. He started this podcast, in fact, and is going to be my co-host every single month on our monthly news recap episodes. But if you just want a bit more Mark, you want all of his unsolicited SEO tips, get them actually solicited directly to your inbox every single week. You get the latest episode of this podcast. You get all of the latest SEO news and articles that Mark has selected and thinks are the things you should be paying attention to. All of that delivered to your inbox every single Monday. So if you want to get, like I said, Mark's usual recaps and stuff, it is one of the best places to go for the latest SEO news and pretty much what you can expect from the best in the industry when it comes to the articles and news that is going on, any updates from Google and all that kind of stuff. Go to coreupdates.com and sign up today to get SEO news, brand new episodes of this very podcast, and Mark's SEO tips delivered straight to your inbox. Coreupdates.com is the place to go. My guest for this week is an entrepreneur, author, influencer, blogger, travel ambassador, podcaster, and perhaps most importantly for us, a self-proclaimed SEO geek. She is the founder of the Soul Food Pot, the #1 Southern soul food site on the internet, and author of 6 culinary guides, the host of the Soul Food Pod, which is a fantastic podcast you can go and check out, by the way, the first podcast dedicated to the history and culture around iconic African-American dishes. Welcome to the show, Shaunda Nicole.
Hi, Jack. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here and kind of like I say, talk shop today.
Yeah, it's a nice little deviate away from what a lot of we talk about. I know you cover a lot of the food side of things on your podcast, but as soon as I saw on your website, self-proclaimed SEO geek, I was like, yes, I need Shaunda on my podcast. Now we get to talk about the cool, interesting stuff behind the business and behind your strategies and all that kind of stuff. And I'm very, very excited to dig around and pick your brain and ask you lots of interesting questions.
I'm excited to share. Yeah, I am a geek in that way where that really does something I could talk about all day. So let's do it.
Awesome. So the topic we're covering is establishing online authority through a consistent elevator pitch. And I know online authority has been a very, very hot topic over the last year, couple of years or so, even the last half a decade or so, in terms of thinking about Google and thinking about their EEAT side of things and how much they emphasize how much you need to prove you're a topical authority and all this kind of stuff. So I kind of want to open the conversation with, why do you think this topic is important to talk about, and why did you want to bring it to the podcast?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me once again. And I think it's really important because I think it's something that's missed a lot by folks that have wonderful content, but I think it's been okay. People have thought it okay to kind of hide behind it. Where, they don't put much attention to their about page or their bio. But it becomes problematic, for one, with Google, when Google's asking for us to have experience and expertise. So, and with that said, it needs to know who we are, who's, creating this content. Users want to know that also. And then in addition to that, and the bigger, broader kind of 360 view of everything, when Google's trying to show who you are in search and land you as an expert, even outside of just your blog or your any platform, but just as a well-rounded expert itself, where your name then becomes searchable, you want to have something, you want to have that expertise and relevancy there. And the fun part about all of this is that we get to tell Google who we are, what we do, and why it matters. Like, we get to feed that to them and have them put on display what it is that we want to say, so that our audiences really do see us as the expert in whatever our websites are about.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a huge thing. Like you said, a lot of people kind of underestimate is really proving that you are an expert in your topic. I don't know, a lot of people discuss that kind of niching down on a particular kind of thing. And I was just saying to you before we started recording, as a British white guy reading your blogs and listening to your podcasts and learning a side of African-American culture I'm not familiar with at all. I'm a terrible cook, by the way, as well. So that's a whole other element. Just go and ask my wife, trust me. But yeah, I think it was really interesting to dive into a lot of your content, and not that I'm saying I went and analyzed everything with excruciating detail or anything like that, but
right.
Listening to your podcast, you can really tell you're passionate about it. I mean, you even have your mum on the podcast talking about your heritage and your origins there as well, literally proving that this is my experience, this is my life, this is who I am and why you should listen to me. I have got, the history behind this. I've got the experience. I've got the hands-on expertise of this thing. And I think that's such a powerful message to convey to your audience. Like you said, whether that's blogs, YouTube, podcasts, whatever it is, there are so many different ways you can do that in the different mediums as well, right?
That's right. I mean, actually, expertise and experience, that part of that EEAT that Google, laid out there for us, is the reason why I started a podcast. I thought it would be fun for sure, but in really trying to elevate my brand, the Soul Food Pot, that was another way that I saw very credible to, tell Google, this is who I am. I come from a history of soul food cooked, and I mentioned my great grandma in season one's intro about how she was an esteemed caterer and Southern soul food expert in North Carolina. So I try to really, more than breadcrumbs, just try out and lay down loaves of bread for Google to say, this is why you should trust me and my content, and share it with, readers who search for this type of recipe. So that was definitely my initial reasoning for wanting to do the podcast, because little kind of pro tip secret here, and podcasts are really highly ranked by Google, or I shouldn't say ranked, but I should say they're really credible as far as Google sees. Google sees them as a show. And even when you have a podcast, you actually earn an IMDb page also, which is amazing. I mean, you probably already know this, Jack. I'm preaching to the choir as I say it to you, but it's just really an amazing, that's not something you can earn from your website. So that's a really amazing thing to tie to you as a credible source that's, out here sharing content that you want Google to pick up, that you want it to be searchable and findable, of course, and you want Google to share to its searchers.
Yeah, I love the little insight there about the IMDb page. I only found that out I've been podcasting for 14 years now, and I'd only discovered my own IMDb page a few years ago. Apparently I wasn't searching my own name enough, apparently.
Right. I don't think many people know that, and it is quite incredible. It's another thing to tackle because it's so neat where, and if anyone doesn't know what an IMDb page is, it's basically a page that all actors and anyone in the Screenwriters Guild, the association, so shows, actors, and again, being that Google's relating podcasts, which we are podcast host shows. So Google has completely identified and categorized that as such, that you get that really credible page, usually associated with the film and show industry in Hollywood, but your podcast receives that. And it's a whole nother beast to go in and try and update it. But just, that's a whole nother thing, a whole nother conversation and podcast for another day. But it's really wonderful to know that you get that type of credit for a podcast that you create, and you can tie that back to what you're doing as a blogger or as a website, a website or storefront that you have.
Yeah, definitely. I think that, like you said, the layer of credibility and the different areas you can, for want of a better phrase, like attack that from. Like, you have your blog, you then have the podcast you're appearing on, your own podcast. Like, for example, you will also get credit for coming on here, Shaunda, as a guest.
Right.
So you're then building that list and building that kind of layers of credibility of like, oh, I'm also on this other show that also has, credibility in their own right and their own audience and all that kind of stuff. And I think, the intro that I said at the beginning there, like listing out you're an author as well. So having another element there of publishing your own books, coming up on like Amazon listings and book listings and all that kind of stuff as well. Can you talk a little bit about your experience of becoming an author and that side of things as well?
Sure. And that's a new experience for me. Thanks for asking. I also, along with the Soul Food Pod, I have a third blog, my first blog being just my namesake, Shaunda Nicole. But and I'll come back to that just because that's where I house all of my authoritativeness on that signature website. So there's a Soul Food Pod, my second blog, and my third blog is Vegas Right Now, which is a site all about the city I live in, Las Vegas, that I love so much. As a result of my blog, Vegas Right Now, I garnered a book deal. So I have a book coming out in spring of 2025 about 100 things to do in Las Vegas before you die. So with that said, like you said, all these credibility markers. So from the onset, I have books that stream or can be downloaded on purchase on Amazon and through my Shopify store. And those certainly add a lot of credibility as well, because those books are cookbooks. And again, about soul food in that case. So Google certainly, sees that as a big authoritativeness that I'm on Amazon, another really highly credible source. And then there's Goodreads, another kind of pro tip for those who have ebooks or, published books, whether that's self-published or with a publisher, that if you haven't already set up a page on Goodreads, that's another way to, really get another huge credibility marker and establish yourself as an established author in the eyes of Google. And so the book that I have coming out now, which will be in a lot of different places, because this one I'm working with a publisher that's producing this one. And so it just really expands my reach as an expert in Las Vegas, because this book will be in Target or in Barnes & Noble, in all the places. So, there's my name again as Shaunda Nicole, author of 100 Things to Do in Las Vegas. And so it just really broadens the reach as far as, Shaunda's an expert on the topic of Las Vegas. Google knows that I'm a go-to for things to do in my city. So it's just like as many ways that you can get your name out there, and as many products that you can produce and tie them back to, said website that you have. For me, that's usually Soul Food, or in this case, Las Vegas. But I want Google to know that I'm an expert in these fields and that I have a lot of credibility and a lot of sources for information that, readers and my audiences can come to me for.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a real kind of key part to it. And I know we talk about that a lot in kind of link building strategies and the digital PR side of things, where getting a lot of different sources. So obviously the more backlinks, the better is the kind of general rule, but also relevancy, right? And the fact that you were talking there about like having a book about Las Vegas, proving and getting a deal with a publisher, that's already a sign of credibility. Of like, that you're not just kind of self-publishing, and I'm not to disparage the self-publishing game.
Right.
Huge respect to self-publishing people, but
absolutely
to add that authority and credibility to it, getting a publisher to sign on and say, we believe in your message, we understand, you know what you're talking about when it comes to Vegas, let's publish a book and let's talk about it. And 100 Things to Do in Vegas Before You Die is just the perfect like title for it, right? That setting everything up to go forward. And
right.
I guess that kind of ties me back to the overall topic of that, building that established authority through an elevator pitch. And that's kind of where I want to kind of dive into your approach to it and how you've grown your brand, because I love it when I see somebody like yourself who, I know Shaunda from being the soul food pot guy and the soul food pot side of things. Like I hear the podcast, I'll see the blog, and then, she's also a travel ambassador. Oh my God, she knows about Las Vegas. I didn't even know she lived in Las Vegas. Oh my God, like learning all this stuff and seeing that other element to you. I love it when I see somebody who will show up on a podcast about a completely different topic or a completely different thing, and I'll have no idea that, oh wow, they know all about this thing as well. So I guess my question is like how you would approach that elevator pitch side of things to go on other podcasts, set up your own podcasts, being contacted by publishers and stuff like that. What was that process like for you to kind of establish that initial elevator pitch to establish your brand?
Yeah, so that was always, honestly, and I'll tell you how I overcame it, but it was always kind of a problem for me, is that I never wanted to be, not that I didn't want to be tied down to one thing, but I have multiple interests. So it was, how do I kind of create this elevator pitch for myself that encapsulates all the things, and not all the things, I'm not saying like 10 different things, but just maybe, 2 to 3 things that I want to be known for. And so the first thing that I would say in doing that is, one of my always tips is to get help. Don't be afraid to invest in yourself and to get help. And so knowing that was a quote unquote problem for me that needed to be solved, because I started as a lifestyle blog with my name, ShaundaNicole.com. And that site covers a lot of different topics, from some Las Vegas travel. It used to have some recipes on it, fashion, beauty tips. So just a lot of women's lifestyle topics. And when I started to get into the world of SEO, I completely began to understand that it's really going to be hard to be relevant and to relevant for one thing, and for Google to trust you if you're somewhat all over the place on topics. And so that was the reason for branching out into the 2 additional sites, the Vegas site and the Soul Food site, because those are passions, interests, things that I like to talk about and want to share information about with an audience or with readers. So they just had to live on their own and be separate. But then it was, how do I tell the story that I'm tied to both of them? And so my favorite thing is to find another expert, who is good at, telling the story of someone. So who can write a bio. And that's what I did. I worked with some of the same people for quite a lot of time, and, approached them, publicity experts, basically, on creating a bio for me that can talk specifically about soul food, or a bio that can talk specifically about why I'm an expert in Las Vegas. And more recently, okay, now let's bring them together and tell the story of just Shaunda Nicole and why I'm passionate about both things. So I always share that tip about going to find an expert, because just as you see yourself as a credible source, there are other people out there who are credible sources, and that's not, publicity is not my lane. It's something that I know about. I've taken quite a bit of master classes about it, but I'm not an expert on that. So I don't want to try and, steer that ship, because I need to be really focused on steering the Las Vegas ship and the Soul Food Plot ship. So find someone who can take care of those things for you. One of my mottos is, it's who, not how. So it's never like, how can I get this done? It's who's going to get this done. I can find someone credible who can, see me through this. And that's what I've done with respect to that. And so from there, once maybe you are the expert in that and you're able to do that on your own. That just wasn't the case for me. So once you find that person, or you're able to come up with that bio that can cohesively tell the story about why you're passionate about, more than one thing, or even if it's just one thing, I still recommend getting someone to share that story for you. You want to then just spread that across all platforms that you can. And I mean, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, your website. You want to be telling the same story in all places. That's super important because it shows consistency with Google that you are who you say you are. When you're going on other platforms, it's easy for them to pick up who you are. And there's the message again to Google. Everywhere you're going, that message should be succinct so that Google is very clear about who you are. And I'll stop here, but we can always talk about kind of what happens after that. And that would be those coveted Google knowledge panels. I don't even know if people know what they really are. I know that people have seen them, but they may not know what the panel is by title. But that's kind of the end goal of being cohesive with your elevator pitch, which is who you are, what you do, and why it matters, and making sure that you're intentional and deliberate about that and spreading it across all platforms.
Yeah, you read my mind with the knowledge graph and knowledge panel side of things. You could see the SEO gears turning in both of our heads. It's like we're syncing up there for sure. And that was definitely a thing I was thinking about when it comes to, like I said, doing so many different things. And I love what you said earlier about having the ShaundaNicole.com, the central website. It's kind of like the brand that pulls everything together, right? And that is the source of, if you want to know everything about me, here is my website. But if you really want to know about Vegas, here's this thing. If you really want to know about my other interests, here's this thing. And there's an element there of diversifying it, obviously. And I think you're totally right. And your strategy has been right in terms of spreading things out and not just having everything all in one place all at once. And I think you're totally right when it comes to that, establishing your clear voice and your authority when it comes to a particular topic. If you're talking about 100 different things, you're spreading yourself thin across layers and layers of things, right? And then it comes round to having a particular site that then this is where all of your Vegas knowledge goes. This is where all of your cooking knowledge goes. This is where all of your branding and your lifestyle and stuff all comes back around there. And like you said about the knowledge graph, I think it's fascinating that it is one of those SERP features you see all the time, because the amount of people, we Google famous people or authors, celebrities, all that kind of stuff, and you'll see the little thing pop up on the right hand side there. But like you said, most people, granted, the listeners and viewers of this podcast probably do know, but I know if I sometimes I bore my wife with SEO nerdy stuff, and she's like, I know what you mean, but I don't care what that means. And she would have no idea what a knowledge panel is, but if I showed it, she'd be like, oh yeah, the thing I've seen on search engine result pages for years at this point.
Exactly.
And like you said, that having that element, and I know plenty of other people talked about how to actually build that knowledge graph, and like you said, so many different sources. People underestimate the power of social when it comes to search stuff as well. I know that's something I feel like kind of takes for granted. Like, oh, I'll just, I'll post on X, I'll post on Instagram, I'll post on LinkedIn, whatever. But like you said, having that consistent message and saying that, this is a particular page for this side of my brand, there's another page for the other side of my brand, and then bringing it all together to show that Shaunda Nicole is an expert in all of these things, and the knowledge graph will reflect that. I would assume like the knowledge graph basically is that little intro I said at the beginning of the podcast. It was like, you're an author, you're a blogger, you're a podcaster, you're an entrepreneur, you're a founder, like all these different elements. It sounds like a lot, but actually they all tie together to form the single brand, right?
That's correct. And like the little bubbles that I see for Google, because the problem I had before was, it's kind of funny now, but it was like, Google doesn't get me. It doesn't understand. It doesn't understand all these things that I do. And so I had to fix that problem. And so, and I want to make it very clear and be transparent. I always say that with my first blog, the Shaunda Nicole site, I was definitely throwing spaghetti at the wall and trying to figure this thing out. And so,
don't we all? Don't we all?
Right. I think we all probably share in that story. So when I teach SEO also and do consulting for it, and I always share that let's look at this site because this is where I did all the things wrong. So
learn from my mistakes. Kind of thing. Yeah.
So now it is the hub, like you said, and you explained that so well. Thank you, about how kind of that site is the nucleus for everything. If you go there, you can definitely from the homepage click to Vegas right now on the Soul Food Pot, or book a consulting service. So it's got everything housed there. But that knowledge panel, like when it shows up for me, there are some bubbles there that I see, and they're spot on. Where it says like soul food, recipe creator, and Las Vegas. So Google finally gets me. It knows exactly, what I'm trying to do after years of hard work. And basically, like I said, we get to write our own. It's so neat that we get to write our own script telling Google who we are. And so it's not that you're just waiting for someone else, like, some other magazine authority or some other podcast authority or some other big online publication to say who you are for Google to pick that out. Google certainly likes that, but we get to be in charge of exactly what we want that footprint to look like for ourselves online. So again, and strategically, bringing someone on to write that wonderful bio for you that's, succinct and cohesive and short and, catchy, but still, very to the point, intentional and deliberate. You want to make sure that's on your website. You want to make sure that if you're going on a podcast, that's the short bio that you share with the podcast host when they're featuring you. And you just want to keep spreading that around. People often underestimate, this is one of my favorite things, the bio for your social media bios. I couldn't get that out, but your social media bios from Instagram to Facebook that, literally like when I have a new product or something coming out. So when we introduced the Vegas site, I spent hours going through and updating those bios to make sure that they all match and are saying the same messaging, so that Google is very clear that everywhere I show up that, the message is the same, that I talk about this thing and I talk about that thing, and that it doesn't have to do guesswork trying to figure out what it is that I do, because when it was doing guesswork, it wasn't guessing right. It didn't do it.
Never trust Google to guess right.
Yeah, don't trust Google to do that. Just let it know. So I often call it speaking Google's love language. And that's a really easy way to speak Google's love language. It really just wants Google to tell it what it is that we're trying to do, what message that we're trying to put out there, and, give it clarity just by saying everywhere you find me, where I have a chance to say something, I'm going to make sure this message is clear as I can for Google, so that that's how you show me the way that I'm trying to be seen, for new readers and new audience members. So that's kind of the easiest way that I can say, but it's just that same message everywhere is very important. And Jack, you mentioned niching down, which is also one of my key pillars, is that we definitely do. I don't think that it's even possible anymore to be online and to have a site without having a strong niche in that area, because it's just the way of Google now with HCU and the helpful content updates. That's, Google's really looking for us to have an authority and to be very clear about a very specific topic that we're anchored in and talking about. And then, of course, we're trying to create our elevator pitch, which is really the bios that we're sharing all across the web. We want to make sure that we're really grounded in those core topics. Even if it's more than one, we just can't, it can't be, I talk about Las Vegas and sometimes Arizona and sometimes this. It's just got to be clear that, I talk about Las Vegas and I talk about food, very, very niche to what it is that we're doing in those bios.
Yeah, definitely. I love the way you put it there of like having to niche down in terms of that Google understanding where you're coming from and speaking Google's love language. That's something we talk about a lot on the show, where if you can make it easier for Google to understand and process the information you want it to,
right,
you are like serving it to them on a silver platter, right? You are giving that information, and I didn't even think about this. This was a previous episode with a schema expert called Dave Ojeda. He was talking about how things like schema, which massively help for the knowledge graph side of things,
right,
then reinforce and essentially save Google a bunch of money, so it doesn't have to go crawling through all of your different content and all of your different sites to find the one bio and then the second bio and then the third bio.
Right.
Connecting all of that stuff, like you said, linking from your central, your brand site, essentially, your influencer site, whatever it is, your central brand site, to your other sub-brands and your other side of things, is just connecting those dots for them, right? Not, for example, I could independently discover the Las Vegas site and then realize like, oh, that's Shaunda as well. Oh my God, I had no idea. But with everything interconnected with those external links following through to the other sites, you're doing Google's work for them. You're helping them find the other sites, make those connections, build those connections for them, rather than, like you said, leave it up to them trying to guess it and be like, is that the same Shaunda Nicole as the one who lives in Las Vegas, the one who does all the recipes as well? Like, is that the same person? I have no idea. Whereas actually you can pretty verifiably prove by linking like, yes, hello, I talk about Las Vegas. If you're interested in my recipes, here are my recipes. If you're interested in lifestyle and travel blogging and stuff, here's this as well. Like, you can connect those stuff so easily. And I love what you do on your the ShaundaNicole.com site, where you have an in the press page where you talk about like, I have been published in these sites. If you want to go and read those articles, here are the links for those articles. Again, it is building those links and connecting those dots for Google, right? I love it. I love it.
Yeah. Thank you. And Jack, I'd love to share another easy tip with our Search to Candour listeners here. And it's really Yoast. And I want to be clear that people sometimes get confused. Yoast doesn't do the work for us, but it just kind of is a guide. I always think of it as a template to say, yeah, you're on the right track with the green, the green or red. No, you kind of need to relook at this and maybe restructure things. But one of the easy things when I first went on this journey, it was probably a couple of years ago, trying to obtain a knowledge panel, it was starting with Yoast, where you go into like the settings there and you tell Yoast, and I had never done this before, and I thought it was the neatest thing that it was available there, but it tells you, to identify whether you're, a brand or business or you're a person. And then you can put in like said picture, your bio picture that you kind of want Yoast, to show up in schema and search all across. Like, this is the centralized picture I want seen of me, or, logo for my brand. And then you get to literally fill in there exactly what it is that this site is about, making sure that when you're putting in keywords, that people search for specific to what your niche is about, and a great description of who you are, what you do, and why you matter, the elevator pitch. That's always a great place to start on your own site, telling that story. And then, of course, you want that message on your about page, your press page, your speaking page, all the pages where someone would come and want to know, if they want to book you as an expert on this topic, or, they want to know more about you, you want it there. And then you mentioned something that I think it's easy, but we sometimes forget to do. But if we have multiple sites on our about page, tell it, say it.
Yeah.
On your about page, say, I hope you'll also come and check out my other site, for Vegas travel information. Here's my site, Vegas right now, vegasrightnow.com, or whatever it is that you have. We can really just say that easily on those about pages and share other links to other, sites that we may have where we talk about other expert topics.
Yeah, 100%. And like I said, I love that little journey of discovery, even outside of the Google side of things, but just from a user perspective, right? If I've gone to your site to understand more about African-American cooking and understand soul food and understand Southern soul food in more detail. And then like, oh, I was planning a trip to Vegas. What a weird coincidence. And I find out that, oh, you actually live in Vegas and know a bunch about Vegas as well. Like, and if you've already established that relationship and that trust, like,
yes.
I understand that I've been following you for a long time. I've listened to the podcast, all this kind of stuff, and you've built that rapport already. And for me, this is something I kind of grew, I'd say like 5 or 6, 7 years ago, where I got out of the habit of following particular like sort of publications and stuff like that. I would follow particular writers or a particular person from place to place. And you then to learn to trust that person's taste or that person's expertise in a particular area. Like, I know that, my beliefs, my understanding, all that kind of stuff follows very closely with yours, Shaunda. So I'm going to follow you from place to place. And maybe I'm not interested in going to Vegas right now, but I might be in the future. So it's worth keeping an eye on it and all that kind of stuff. Like,
yeah.
already establishing that relationship between you and your user is so important. And like I said, it's something I learned to talk about my previous career very briefly.
Well,
I was a comic book writer very briefly.
so cool.
So I have an Amazon author page, and we were just talking about, like, having the author page side of things and the IMDb side of things from podcasting and all that kind of stuff. Like, understanding where to follow. Like, I use the analogy of, like, I'd follow every Spider-Man comic or every Batman comic or whatever it was. But what I actually like about that is the way it's written or the way it's drawn or the way it's created. So actually, I'm going to follow this artist or this writer from book to book. Now they're not doing Spider-Man. They might be doing something else. And then they go off and do their own independent stuff or whatever it is. And you get to the really juicy stuff. You understand, like, this is what they've been trying to say this whole time.
Yes.
This is, the real meat of the situation.
Right.
And I love that way where you can really understand something about somebody when you follow their journey. And like I said, I do a lot of research on guests. I know not every podcast host does that, as you can probably tell, Shaunda.
Right.
I will go and listen to people's podcasts. I want to understand, like, your vibe, where you're coming from. And for those of you who don't know, I get a lot of pitches for guests on this show. We get, like, probably a dozen a week or so of people being like, hey, we think this guy should be a great guest on your podcast and whatever. And you are the very first person who I've ever said yes to who has just cold pitched me out of nowhere.
Oh, wow.
So
I'm honored. Wow.
I'm not saying that as like look at me, I'm big. Genuinely, when I went and did my research, I found out all about you. I listened to your podcast. I understood where you were coming from. You knew what you were talking about, and you proved it very quickly. Like, I didn't spend 2 hours just reading every single blog post. I'm not going to claim I did that, but I very quickly understood. I saw you on YouTube. I heard your podcast. I read blog posts and stuff. That element you were able to prove. Yeah, I know what I'm talking about. This is why I will, when you're pitching to someone else, why I provide value for your audience, right? And I think your journey and your story is not very similar to a lot of the previous guests we've had on. A lot of previous guests are exclusively working in SEO or digital marketing and have been doing that for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, whatever it is. But you bringing all these different elements together, I found so fascinating. And I was just like, I need to have Shaunda on the podcast. This is a fascinating combination of interests and hobbies and areas of expertise and stuff. It captured the imagination straight away. And now maybe my wife and I will go to Vegas at some point, and I'll be going to vegasrightnow.com and checking it out, you know?
Yeah, right. Comic book conference, Comic-Con. Yeah. Well, I loved how you explained that. Again, honored to hear you say that, and thank you so much for having me. That is, I mean, even if you just know even if you know someone that's going to Vegas, like, hey, I've been following this person for years. She's such an expert. 100%. In that.
Yeah.
So it's always that. But I love how you mentioned about, following a comic, a specific character or superhero rather in a comic book, and then going so granular as to the illustrator or the writer, because that's really, also part of that niche type of thing, is that you really reach that core group of people. I recently went to a Mariah Carey concert, and she is my favorite singer all time. And I'm one of those fans who, I'm dating myself, like when there were tapes, we flipped to the B-side, and I know all the B-side tracks and, word for word. So when I wrote the story, because it had to do with something to do in Las Vegas, and of course she's highly searched for, when I wrote the story, one of the things that I was sharing is that this is for, like, her OG, she calls her fans lambs. So this is for the OG lambs, the ones who know, like, the songs that aren't on the radio, word for word, and who thought she'd never play those, in a concert setting. So it gets very niche and very granular. When you niche down, you really do reach that hardcore base of people who really are in tune with the type of content you share, and then are interested in knowing more about you. That, like you said, hey, I didn't know you even lived in Las Vegas. I was just here for the soul food, but I've really come to, love the stories you tell. I love the recipes, they're so entrenched in my family. This is the only way we make said pie nowadays. So they do really trust you to say, okay, I know someone that's going to Vegas, or I'm going to Vegas. I want you as my source because I'm just so in tune with you. We've had this connection for years on my dinner table, that's really intimate. So, if you have other things to share, I'm open to hear them. That's kind of how the reader is at that point. And that's such a wonderful relationship to be able to foster, with someone. And so absolutely, if there are other topics, we should definitely not assume that our readers and audiences know that, but, lay that out for them very clearly, that I also talk about this. and, share that with them.
Yeah, definitely. I think that ties perfectly around to the way Google describes the WEAT side of things. When we've got experience, expertise, authoritativeness, and then it builds to that trust. That's
Right.
really where they have the, I don't know if you've seen the Venn diagram thing where they have the 4 smaller circles and then the larger trust in the middle there, that is like the other 4 things contribute to the wider building of trust with your audience, with your users. And that's exactly what we've just been talking about, right? Understanding that I can rely on you as a personality, as somebody who aligns with, my beliefs and my way of thinking or whatever it is, or even just I can understand that you're an expert in what you're talking about and you wouldn't just completely BS me and be like, well, I'm not just going to lie about this terrible bar in Las Vegas to go to because I've been lying about soul food for the last few years. Like, and proving yourself and understanding yourself and growing that relationship with your audience is so powerful. And I think that's why things like podcasts and YouTube have grown so much recently, and especially in kind of visibility for brands and for influencers and personalities and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, Shaunda, but I listen to a lot of podcasts as well. I watch a lot of YouTube, and it's that building of that relationship where, again, I will follow, oh, I heard you as a guest on this podcast, which again, hello, you're a guest on my podcast, Shaunda.
Right.
Hopefully a lot of my listeners will then go and check out your website, check out your blog, and then it's building those connections, right? Oh, funny enough, I will not name any names, but I will tell a story of somebody who messaged me the other day who got a job because they heard that person, their new employer heard them on this podcast.
Right.
And they were like, oh yeah, they applied for an SEO job and they heard like, oh yeah, I listened to the Search With Candour podcast and I heard you on the podcast with Jack. We were interested in having an interview. And that blew my mind. That was like an amazing, cool thing. But it's like you said, it's the who you know side of things, right? It's those connections. That's that little thing. Who would have thought that an appearance on a podcast or a YouTube video or whatever it is can lead to a huge brand deal or the next big stage in your life, or like you said, getting contacted to write 100 things to do in Las Vegas before you die, when you just, I'll start a new website, see how it goes, and it transforms into something completely different.
Absolutely. I mean, I can attest to just what you said, that wowing situation. I have 2 team members, and they are because I listened to them on a podcast. So,
there you go.
2 separate podcasts, one this year, one about 3 years ago. So totally. And I didn't listen to the podcast with that intention at all. I listened to the podcast because I enjoyed the content on the podcast. But
exactly
out of that, just hearing those, one of them definitely, she came on board in her complete complete capacity as an SEO topical expert, and the other came on board. She was talking about user generated content, and we're working more on publicity strategies. So it was just I felt there was a vibe, a personality. Once we had our one-on-one call, it was like, oh my gosh, I literally said to her, I have to have you on my team. So it's just, it's amazing what an intimate conversation can really, inspire in folks listening, which is why podcasts are just amazing.
Yeah, I think that has become that. And funny enough, I was listening to Edge of the Web Radio, one of my favorite SEO podcasts, the other day. And Michelle Fortune was on talking about perhaps the next stage of WEAT, including an extra A and an extra T in there. And the extra A I thought was very, very interesting with authenticity.
Ooh.
And I think especially in the age of AI generated stuff that we're seeing completely dominate every conversation in SEO at the moment.
Oh my gosh.
I think authenticity is such a key part of that. And again, understanding your story, listening to your podcast, and I think that comes the moment, like you said, you intro talking about your great grandmother's recipes, and then having your mother as a guest on the show, and talking about that, like, well, that'd be a weird thing to make up on a podcast. Like that seems like a bit of a stretch. That seems pretty authentic to me.
Right. And an easy tip that I'd love to share with listeners is I started doing this on my travel site, where I post a picture, and I try to do it as often as I can remember, like on each blog post. But just one of the pictures, I try to make sure that I'm in the place where I'm, telling you to.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And then I actually caption it so Google, beyond alt text, that they can read it, and my readers can read it also. But I'll say, like, here I am at the Mariah Carey concert at Park MGM, where you can see the picture, but then I'm also really talking to Google because, my reader obviously sees that's me, and at the concert, but then Google can also know that just giving just an extra stamp of, authenticity there, that I'm really here. I didn't just sit home and, write you an article about this concert based on other things that I read online, that I went to the concert, I experienced it, it was in Las Vegas, and here's why you should go to it, or things you should know about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's bringing around that firsthand area of expertise, and the experience side of things, I think, is so key, and what Google has been emphasizing so much, whether that comes to you're trying to sell a product or a service or whatever it is, being honest about what you have experience with, the pros and cons of your product. I know Google has talked about this recently, and I've talked about it a lot on the show, of being honest about what your product does and what it doesn't do.
Right.
I'm not going to go to a particular, I'm not going to go to McDonald's and expect to get a gourmet meal, because that's not what they do. Also, I'm vegetarian, so it's a bad example. Right. But like, you understanding brands, understanding influencers, personalities, individual brands, and things like that, and where that comes to their area of expertise. We now know, maybe somebody heard this podcast, it's like, oh, I know Shaunda's a big Mariah Carey fan, and then finds that blog post. You were actually there, provably actually there. Wow. And rather than just, like you said, seeing a thread on Twitter or whatever it is and being like, oh yeah, I saw some good reviews and I think this would be great if you're into that sort of thing, I guess. I don't know. Right. He's nowhere near as convincing or compelling of a story as, I was there, it was amazing, I'm a long-term fan, this is for the hardcore fans. Like, you're really, really building that relationship and building that proof of concept in a way, right?
Yeah.
Of like, I know what I'm talking about, and here it is. And quick question. I know it's a very, very tough question. Mm-hmm. Favorite Mariah Carey song? Hit me. Number one, okay. Just one.
Favorite Mariah Carey song is not one, again, that they play on the radio. But
you're going for the deep cut.
Yeah, going for the deep cuts. It's Angel's Cry is my favorite one. And particularly, she does two renditions. I love the one with Neo singing.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so that's my
I'm a bit of a basic bitch. I will go for Emotions, because it is just
that one will grab you then.
Spectacular. Yeah, that's the one. My wife and I will basically compete in singing pretty badly, I hasten to add, in the house, and see who can get higher and higher in that octave range.
That is me. I've never proclaimed to be a good singer. I just love good singers. So the one thing I can say is I have a cat who does show up on my Shaunda Nicole site. She loves my singing. It's very odd, but so I get to sing for her.
That's the vouch you need for your singing quality.
That's cats. All I needed. Yeah,
we've got two cats as well. We're the same way.
Love them.
So I kind of want to wrap things up and think about, as much as we've talked about the consistency of having that elevator pitch, building that knowledge graph and all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
I'd love to kind of pick your brains about being able to adapt that pitch to different mediums. So like you said, we've been published in online articles, you've been on TV shows, you've been on podcasts. Like, how do you go through that process of kind of understanding the different audiences for those different mediums, and how you approach those different sides of things?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So you'll, for me, again, having someone come in, create this like full on bio. And they'll usually create for me a short bio, maybe 150 words or less. And it's really just extractions from the full bio. And so when you're going, I guess, onto different platforms, well, I'll start with platforms and then we'll go into like guest situations. So on different platforms, like let's say we're taking that bio now to Instagram, where we know I think you get 150 characters, if I'm still right about that. Don't know.
Yeah.
Somewhere around there. So you don't even get 150 words. So you're really just pulling out, you've got to hit, I guess this is the same if you were going on a podcast or a television show. And let's just say Instagram really trains you to do this well, is that, again, you want to answer those three questions: who you are, what you do, and why it matters. The why it matters is really important because you could just say like, I watch TV, which a lot of people put that on their Instagram bio, like what they like to watch or, what their favorite color is. But why does that matter? And if you can't give that answer to you can't answer that question in a way that's going to be invoking or thought-provoking or inspiring or, some type of call to action from, the person reading it, then we want to think of something different, because it's an old sales. When I was learning sales, when I worked in corporate, 100 years ago, they would say, what's everyone's favorite radio station? It was before we had podcasts. So what's everyone's favorite radio station? It was WIFM, sorry, and that stood for What's in It for Me. So anyone reading your bio is always asking that question. They don't know they're even asking that question, but to get their attention, it's what's in it for me. So what, your favorite color is red, or so what, you're a Southern soul food expert. What's in it for me? So what I can relay back to them is I've got 100 or 250 easy free recipes for you. Or, I take, classic meals and make them easy, turn 4-hour dishes into 15-minute dishes. So of course we say it's much better in a clean bio, but that's just, quick hits where it's going to make someone stick around. Okay, so I don't need 4 hours in the kitchen. I can do this in 15. Yes, let me show you. And so that's, we want to say something to really draw them in. So the why it matters is so important. And oftentimes it's not your name that matters. So in the Instagram,
unless you're Mariah Carey,
yeah, like that's it. People are just definitely searching Mariah Carey. But in the beginning days, Google tells me that people search my name now, but it definitely wasn't that way before. So as we're building that, our name really doesn't matter. So in that name field, one of the best kept secrets on Instagram, you really want to put a keyword in there as to what it is that you do. Not your business name, not your name, but what is it that you do? So for me, it might be Southern soul food, cooking. That might be the keyword phrase that I don't even know what we have in there right now, but it's something relevant to what we do. But you want to put that in there because that's how people will find you, on that particular platform. So it's just the same three things: who you do, who you are, what you do, and why it matters, and making sure that you're really enticing or capturing someone's attention with the why it matters and why they should stay here, watch more of your videos, click through to your articles, all those things.
Yeah, I think the what's in it for me is so key there, where it comes to time back to what we said 40 minutes ago or whatever it was, where talk about providing value for your audience, right? Like you said, 250 free recipes. Like you're putting yourself out there and being like, I can prove it if you give me like half a second.
Right.
You don't have to go and buy the book. Yeah, I can prove myself. You can get the first taste is free kind of thing.
Yes.
To like, there you go. Like if you want to take a sample, if you want to understand where I'm coming from, then here's it all out, on Front Street to say this is what I'm offering. And I think that's so fascinating when it comes to doing different mediums. Like you said, going to Instagram, you have such a short amount of time. Yeah. Even when it comes to TikTok, it's a whole other conversation.
Right.
Being even shorter and even faster. And
yeah.
I know me with my ADHD brain combined with TikTok and all that kind of stuff, like I will get bored of a story if somebody's like, so the other day I was on Wednesday, I was doing this thing with my wife and blah, blah, blah. Like, you could have told me the story by now.
Right.
What are you doing? You have not tailored this content to this platform.
Yeah.
And that is the kind of story you would tell on a podcast. You have got typically, some podcasts go on for hours. Mm-hmm. I've been totally guilty of that before. my movie podcast is like 2.5 hours long, but we tend to keep this to about an hour. But I like to think of this podcast and podcasts in general as this more conversational thing, right? And same can be true with sort of TV interviews and stuff like that as well. You've got that back and forth. You've got that element to it. Whereas with something like a social post, you have a matter of seconds, maybe like 3 or 5 at the stretch.
I think 3
to get somebody's attention.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think 3 is the golden rule, right? In the first 3 seconds, you need to understand what this is, who I am, why should I care? It's like, oh God, yeah, you need to really get yourself out there very, very quickly.
Very quickly. My girlfriend always describes that she's a beast on TikTok. And so she always says, I'm a goldfish. Like I've lost interest in the first second. So you have the attention. Yeah.
100%. Yeah, I think that's such a thing that so many people underestimate is just those little tweaks. As long as, like you said, keeping it consistent, I think is important. Like, I'm going to look at your Instagram right now, Shaunda. I'm going to have a look. Things to do in Vegas right now is the top line there. Food, fun, and best travel life hacks that make you feel like you won the jackpot.
Right. Who doesn't want to win the jackpot? Yeah.
Problem solved. Yeah. End of story.
Problem
sorted.
Solved. Going to make this easy for you and fun.
Exactly. Yeah. So you're bringing in that personality of like it. When I'm talking about food, it's the best travel life hacks and it's fun. Like you are not taking yourself seriously. You're a very smiley, like engaging kind of person. Mm-hmm. It's not going to be super like down to every single possible detail. You're going to make it interesting and engaging. It's not just like, here is a list of 10 things to do and it's just bullet pointed and it's not interesting. Bringing your personality to it. And I think, again, what we were talking about earlier on when it comes to building that audience and building that trust, you learn to like personalities and trust personalities and understand who you're vibing with and saying like, oh yeah, you know, I see Shaunda smile and next to Mariah Carey doing a big thumbs up and being excited. That's way more engaging than just like a terrible picture of Mariah Carey off in a corner somewhere on stage.
Right.
Not only is it proof that you're there, it's your face, it's your brand, it's, you know, that engaging side of things that is bringing in your audience. And I think that can be true across all the different platforms in different forms.
Oh yeah. With us having, you know, most of us probably being bloggers first, social really gives us the ability, and I know this works for celebrities, where people feel like they're really engaging with them, or, you know, now you know your favorite celebrity's personality because of their social, you know, so the same thing that, you know, we can really transcend beyond the blog and on social, you know, show more of that personality, even down to, you know, what you post in stories, even though that expires, but it's still where readers feel like they can get really close to you. And
you can also craft your highlights as well. I know you do this. I know plenty of other brands and personalities do this, where like, I've shared my stories, but there's some particular good ones. Here's all my stories from when I saw Mariah last week.
Exactly.
Like, here's all the highlights. And if somebody sees your post and searches for Mariah and finds you that way, they then get all of that curated content, right?
Exactly. Where I can still be a recipe creator, but, you know, from stories to highlights, I can share more personal details. Like, after we ate dinner, we went to a concert last night. Here's, you know, what it was about. Come with me. So it's a really great way to get more personal with that audience.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's partly why I enjoy podcasts so much, why I enjoy listening to as well as making podcasts, is because it allows us to, and not to get all like psychotherapists, but allows us to get a bit deeper and open up and talk about this stuff. I know, like, my wife is very much the same as your partner, talking about the like TikTok side of things, of like, no, I can't be dealing with this. No, I'm just going to swipe away. I cannot be dealing with this. And I will be there listening to an hour and a half long episode of a podcast, and she will not be able to understand what I'm talking about at all.
Or as you mentioned, me bringing my mom on, you know, was a wonderful way. Otherwise, you know, how would you know her personality? And we, you know, genuinely, we had so much fun doing the show, the podcast together. But it was just also a wonderful way to introduce her to my audience, you know, as to how did she grow up cooking? You know, why do I do some of the things I do with my recipes? Because my mom does, and here's why. So it's just a great way to introduce a lot of different elements that, you know, we can really get to jump off the page by having these conversations that you can.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think there's that, like, bringing your mom onto the podcast being the perfect example, and tying it all back round to the soul food pot side of things, where it's like so much of people's cooking and recipes and stuff are influenced by their family members.
That's right.
Almost everyone is taught by, maybe it's not your biological parents, I'm not trying to, you know, pigeonhole anyone or anything like that,
right,
but mothers, fathers, family members, all this kind of stuff. People who raised you will teach you how to cook and all this kind of stuff. And that felt so right. Like the opening, you know, 5-10 minutes of the first episode of the podcast, you're talking about your family, you're talking about your origin story. And if you did that in the Vegas side of things, that would feel a bit weird, maybe.
Right.
Like, and unless you're born in Vegas, unless you've got a history there and all that kind of stuff,
right?
There's a different angle there, right? Like, no, I actually live in Vegas, and this is my experience of living here, but I've learned a lot of the recipes and my style and my way of cooking from my mum. So this is this context here. It would be weird if I brought my mum onto this show. She was not interested in digital marketing or SEO. She was a mental health nurse for 30 years. Right. She's not interested in that. So I think, like you said, bringing that authenticity when it feels right for the brand, when it feels right for the message and the pitch that you're saying, then absolutely add to it. It builds those layers. It creates those extra connections. Exactly as we were saying a little while ago, whether that's interconnecting your different sites and bringing all of your interests together, or bringing in friends, family members, colleagues to talk about stuff, bringing on the experts and all that kind of thing. I think that is the brilliant way to build that brand and grow your network and build those connections.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And it's really as how creative can you get with it, which it makes it really fun for all of us making podcasts and shows and just content, because we are creators. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I know we mentioned them a couple of times throughout the show, but where can people find you? I won't make you list everything out. I will put links in the show notes for everything. Don't worry. So listeners and viewers, do go and check out and follow Shaunda in the links. But where is the best place to find you, Shaunda?
Yeah, it's my website, shaundanicole.com, which is the same as my Instagram handle. And my Nicole is spelled with an E. It's Necole. And of course, my first name, Shaunda, Shaunda. So you can always reach me there. Just probably like most of our listeners here, they're even on Instagram. There's a link thing in the bio, which, runs down all the sites where you can hop around and get to where you need to easily.
Amazing. There you go. You've got the connections already built there, right? You're already into LinkedIn, and they can find you wherever they're looking. They can always find you. And just Google Shaunda. There you go. Find the knowledge graph.
Find the knowledge graph. Yes.
Just do the mic drop of just Google me.
Yeah.
There you go.
There we go. Yeah. You got to say it. So yeah, I can.
Exactly. I can say it on your behalf, right then.
Love it.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Shaunda. It's been a real pleasure to have a conversation about recipes, SEO, Mariah Carey, and everything in between.
Yes. You had me at comic books, but yes, this was great.
And that wraps up this week's episode of Search with Candour. Thank you so much for watching or listening, wherever you're watching or listening. If you are watching on YouTube, please do give this video a like. Please do share it around. All the usual stuff to help promote and spread the good word of Search with Candour. I'll be back over the next couple of weeks. I'll be back with Mark, back here in the studio, talking about all the latest SEO news. I'm sure we'll get into the Google API leaks that happened earlier on in the month and all that good stuff. And I'll be talking to Amina Demiri-Watson all about the sins that so many agencies are guilty of committing. And I think you kind of get the vibe already. Amina and I both have a fair amount of agency experience, both good and bad. It's pretty good here at Candour, to say the least. I talk about that on the episode. And we get into a lot of the sins that a lot of agencies are guilty of committing in the industry. And I think it's a really interesting conversation. It's fantastic to have Amina on the show. Hopefully, I'm going to be a guest on SEO's Getting Coffee with Amina as one of the hosts in a few weeks' time as well. So stay tuned for that. Of course, I will share that on all the usual social media places. Please do go and follow us on all our social media bits. I post all the podcast highlights and all that stuff on Instagram and LinkedIn, so stay tuned for that. Go and subscribe to Core Updates if you're not already, and please do check out our sponsors, Also Asked and Wix Studio as well if you haven't already. In the meantime, thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next week. Until then, have a lovely week.